Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to look at Hosea chapters 1 through 3, where we read about Hosea's marriage. Hosea chapter 1, verse 1, the word of the Lord which came to Hosea, the son of Beri, during the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. Those are all kings of Judah. And also in the northern kingdom, during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. That's the northern kingdom of Israel. But now we start into the message, verse 2. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go take for yourself a wife of harlotry and have children of harlotry, for the land commits flagrant harlotry. You notice the triple repetition of that term. Um, and that's not necessarily speaking, when you use the term harlot in this sense, it might be speaking about a professional prostitute, or it might just be speaking of an unfaithful woman. But in any case, it's a bad situation. Now, let me just say, set the record straight, that God does not command believers, as a general rule, to go out and take wives or take spouses that are going to be unfaithful. And yet he's doing exactly that here with Hosea. And that's because Hosea is going to be a paradigm. He's going to be a picture of God's relationship with unfaithful Israel. So don't take this as marital advice. This is not how to have a good marriage. In fact, you're told to be pure, and the Christians ought to not be bound together with unbelievers or people that's acting like an unbeliever. But if you're going to look for a spouse, you ought to look for somebody who is holy and pure, and you ought to be that yourself. But Hosea is a special case because he's going to act out God's relationship with Israel, and that's exactly what he does. Verse 3: so he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Now, there's going to be a hint. She may have been married before. I don't want to say that that's the case, because we're going to see three children that are married. I'm sorry, three children come from this union, but there will be a hint that maybe there are other children, either unmentioned or maybe that were already there, and I don't know which it is. Verse 4, and the Lord said to him, name him, this is the firstborn child, name him Jezreel. Now, Jezreel means to be sown of God. But when you sow a seed, that doesn't mean you just take the seed and push it in the ground. You actually take the seed and you throw it out. Remember how Jesus told the parable of the sower. And he throws the seed out. He scatters the seed. And so Jezreel can have one of two ideas. It can mean sown, that is planted by God, or it can be scattered by God. And notice, for just a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel. So he's speaking about Jezreel as a place name. There's a place called Jezreel. We're going to look at that in a moment. And I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Now, like I said, it means sown or scattered by God. And this triple reference to Jezreel is a reference to a place, and yet it's a place that has its name is significant. We're going to see that idea of a place that's scattered or sown by God. And we're going to see both of those references, both a bad reference of being scattered, but also a good reference eventually of being planted. Let's look at that place, the valley of Jezreel. You see the Mount Gilboa in the distance, but then there's both the city of Jezreel and a wide open valley. It's the most fertile and the most lush. If you want to plant crops in Israel, this is the place you naturally go. Let's look at that on a map. There you have that valley of Jezreel. The entire, you have a big mountain range that goes from south to north in Israel, and it's broken by this valley when the mountain actually curves out toward the ocean and actually into the ocean. And in that open spot, that's the most fertile area. And this was the scene of a number of famous battles. This is the place where Deborah led led the Israelites in fighting against the Canaanites from Hatzor. This is the place where Gideon fought the Midianites. This was the place where Saul, I showed you the picture of Mount Gilboa. That's the place where Saul died. This is also a place where both Joram and Ahaziah and shortly thereafter Jezebel all met their end at the hands of Jehu. And so it was a scene of great conflict, but also the scene of death and destruction, and a place where the enemies of Israel had often met their end, but also where Israelites had met their end as well. And so in verse 6, then she conceived again and gave birth this time to a daughter. And the Lord said to him, name her Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer have Raham. Raham is the word for compassion, but Lo is the word for not. So not compassion, or no compassion, we would say. For I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel, that I would ever forgive them, but I will have compassion on the house of Judah, and deliver them by the Lord their God, and will not deliver them by bow, sword, battle, horses, or horsemen. Now, just to give you a spoiler alert, what's going to happen is we're going to see the northern kingdom taken away into captivity. God's not going to have compassion on the northern kingdom of Israel. But then when the Assyrians, the same Assyrians that took the northern kingdom of Israel into captivity, they will come now against the southern kingdom of Judah and against King Hezekiah, and God will deliver them, but not by bow, sword, battle, horses, or horsemen, not by traditional means, but God's going to send the angel of the Lord to deliver the kingdom of Judah, and he's going to do that when, during the middle of the night, the angel of the Lord will come, and 185,000 of the Assyrian troops will just not wake up in the morning permanently. They're going to die, and that will be God's deliverance. Verse 8, when she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and gave birth to a son, and the Lord said, name him Lo Ami. Now remember, Lo, we said, is not or no. Am is people, but Ami is my people. So you're going to name him not mine. Imagine having a child and you name that child not mine. And God explains, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. And so here are three names, each one depicting judgment against the people of God, against the northern kingdom of Israel. Verse 10, and yet, and here's the positive thing, so far we've opened with the message of judgment, and yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea. Now, when we read that, those are familiar words. We first heard those back in Genesis 22:17. That's the chapter where God had instructed Abraham to offer up Isaac, his only son, as an offering upon the altar. And Abraham had been willing to do it, had actually taken Isaac, had put him on the altar, and then God had intervened and had stopped him and had given him a substitute. The ram caught in a thicket had served as a substitute for Isaac. And now God had given this promise, Genesis 22:17, that your descendants will be like the number of will be like the sands of the sea, which cannot be counted. And so that promise is echoed now. Yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, what God had promised to Abraham, he's going to bring about, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it is said to them, you are not my people, God had just said that, yet it will be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. God is going to take that judgment and turn it around, and it will become a message of blessing instead. Now, when we get to the New Testament, we see the same promise echoed, and yet it is applied not just to Israel, it is applied to us who have become part of spiritual Israel as we believed in the same Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, the Messiah that the God of the Old Testament had promised, as we have believed in him. So we have been grafted into something into which we didn't actually belong. We who were not God's people, we who were pagan Gentiles, have become the people of God, the sons of the living God. Verse 11, and the sons of Judah And the sons of Israel will be gathered together. So remember, these are two nations that have become two separate peoples, and they will appoint for themselves one leader, and they will go out from the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. A promise of not just scattering, but also a promise of planting. And when God plants, they will grow. Now, we saw in chapter 1 the names of judgment and then a promise of grace at the end. Now we're going to come to Hosea chapter 2, where again, first we're going to see judgment, then we're going to see grace. This will be a song of judgment. So instead of just merely prophesying, we're going to break into song, and it's going to be in sort of a rhythm and in parallelism. And we're going to see that all throughout most of Hosea, actually. And it will be followed by a promise of grace. So chapter 2 and verse 1 starts off, say to your brothers, Ami, remember Am is people, Ami is my people, and to your sisters, Ruama, remember that's compassion. Verse 2, contend with your mother, contend, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. You see, there's been a divorce. This is language of divorce that's taken place. And let her put away her harlotry from her face, and her adultery from between her breasts. Now notice, putting away, harlotry and adultery, those are, yes, two separate words, but they carry essentially the same idea here. So this is in parallelism. If you're not sure what harlotry is, look at adultery. If you're not sure what adultery is, look at harlotry. They are describing essentially the same thing. Or I will strip her naked and expose her as on the day when she was born. She came into the world naked, and she's going to go out from me. If she insists on being unfaithful, then I will strip away that which I have given her in the marriage. And again, this is language of divorce. I will also make her like a wilderness, make her like desert land, and slay her with thirst. So notice these are descriptive of land, not necessarily women. But remember that Gomer, the woman, is representing the people and the land of Israel. Verse 4, also I will have no compassion on her children, because they are children of harlotry. Remember what he said, not mine. For their mother has played the harlot. She who conceived them has acted shamefully. For she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. I'm looking to make some extra money out there, and I'm looking for my various lovers. She's playing the part of an unfaithful woman, of a prostitute. Verse 6, therefore, behold, I will hedge up her way with thorns. I will build a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths. I'm going to make it not easy for her to go astray. Now, I'm not doing that just to be mean. I'm doing that to bring her back. Verse 7, she will pursue her lovers, but she will not overtake them. She will seek them, but will not find them. And then she will say, and this is God's grand design, then she will say, I will go back to my first husband, for it was better for me than now. I'm going to make it where all your other relationships do not satisfy. It's interesting how God sometimes, in his grace, will make it so that all the things that we pursue, even when we get them, we will find them unsatisfactory, so that we might only be satisfied in him. And what he is seeking to do is turn us back to himself. We come down to verse 13. He says, I will punish her for the days of the Baals. Now notice, we're used to thinking of Baal as just one god. The word Baal technically means Lord, or master, or even husband. And so there were a number of different pagan gods, a number of different Baals, as it's described here, when she used to offer sacrifices to them and adorn herself with her earrings and jewelry and follow her lovers, so that she forgot me, declares the Lord. You see, Israel's problem was that Israel tried to, yes, worship God, but then to worship other gods alongside God. And God says, I won't be one of a number of husbands. No, you can't take me as one of your lovers. It's either me or them. And so I'm going to punish you for your unfaithfulness to these pagan gods. Verse 14, therefore, behold, I will allure her, bring her into the wilderness, and speak kindly to her. I'm taking her back to the place where she first met me. You see, Israel's wilderness experience was the place where Israel first met God. She was brought out of Egypt. That was sort of the birth of the nation, and she came down to Mount Sinai, and there God actually entered into a wedding with His people. In an ancient wedding, you would have a canopy, a huppah, a covering, and God made a covering. He made the cloud, the pillar of fire by night, but the cloud by day, and it served as a covering as He entered into a marriage covenant with His people Israel. Verse 15, then I will give her her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor as a door of hope. Now, that valley of Achor, we're going to look at the reference there in a minute. It's a valley in Israel, but it has significance there because something happened at the valley of Achor. Let's finish the verse and then we'll explain that. And she will sing there as in the days of her youth and in the days when she came up from the land of Egypt. However, you would think the valley of Achor, there she sings as in the days of her youth, and yet Achor means trouble. It's the valley of trouble. From where do you get this idea? Um, its first mention is back in Joshua chapter 7 and verse 24. You remember the story where the Israelites had come over the Jordan River and they had captured the city of Jericho, and God had told them, don't take any of the spoil from Jericho. But one man had disobeyed. His name was Achan, and because Achan had done that, he brought trouble upon the entire Israelite community, where they went into their next battle, and they actually suffered a great defeat. And when this became known that Achan had done this, we read in Joshua 7:24, then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan the son of Zerah, the silver and the mantle, the bar of gold, and these are the things that he had stolen from Jericho. And they also took his sons, his daughters, his oxen, his donkeys, his sheep, his tent, and all that belonged to him, and they brought them up to the valley of Achor. What did they do? Joshua said, why have you achored us? Why have you troubled us? The Lord will trouble you. He will achor you this day. And all Israel stoned them with stones, and they burned them with fire after they had stoned them with stones. And that's how the valley gets its name. Verse 15, then God says, then I will give her her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor, not no longer as a place of trouble, but the valley of Achor as a door of hope. And she will sing there as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up from the land of Egypt. And so Achor now becomes, instead of a place of trouble, God takes that trouble and turns from that trouble, He turns it into hope. After all, think about this: the failure of Israel, the depopulation of Israel, the rejection of Israel resulted in the salvation of so many more. You and I have been grafted in because that natural branch was broken off. And so their trouble has become our hope, and not just our hope, but their hope as well, if they will repent and turn back to the Lord, back to Jesus as their Messiah. And so you have the picture of Achan. Remember, he was guilty. He had done that which he should not do. His sin brought defeat and death upon the nation, and he was put to death for his sin so that the nation could now go forward and partake in victory. And in that, there's a wonderful contrast between Achan and Jesus, who was without sin, without guilt, and his obedience as he goes to the cross brought victory and life to the world. You see, he was put to death for our sins so that all who believe can partake in victory. We continue in Hosea chapter 2, verse 16. It will come about in that day, declares the Lord, that you will no longer call me Ishi. An Ish is a man, or it can be a husband. So the Hebrew word for man is Ish, and for woman is Isha. Um, you will no longer call me Ishi, my man. I'm sorry, you will call me Ishi, and will no longer call me Baali. Baali is Lord, also a word for husband, but notice one is more intimate. One's more formal, one's more intimate. So God is using the language of intimacy. Verse 17, for I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, so that they will be mentioned by their names no more. Verse 18, in that day I will also make a covenant, literally cut a covenant for them with the beasts of the fields. Now notice, when you make a covenant, when you cut a covenant, um, but this covenant is with the beasts of the fields, the birds of the sky, and the creeping things of the ground. And the language there reminds me of an earlier time when you have a covenant, not just made with people, but with the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky and the creeping things on the ground. And notice, and I will abolish the bow, not just the bow, but the sword and war from the land. But notice that reference to bow, it reminds us of something way back in the book of Genesis, when God cut a covenant with the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky and the creeping things of the ground. And when it was a covenant with all creation, the Noahic covenant, yes, it was made with Noah and with his sons, but with his descendants and with even with the animals. And what did God say? He said, I'm going to take my bow, my weapon of war, my bow and arrow, I'm going to place it in the sky. And I sort of like to think about this too. This was suggested to me. I like this idea that, that the bow is pointed, it's not pointed at us, it's pointed at God Himself, saying, I'm not going to break my covenant. And notice what He says here, and will make them lie down in safety. In a sense, it's a return to the Noahic covenant, but it's a covenant not just for the past, but for the future as well. Verse 19, I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you. And notice the betrothal language here. The betrothal is not what you do when you're taking a wife back, but when you're entering into a new relationship. And what God is saying is that He's saying this relationship will be like it was new. It won't be taking an unfaithful wife and saying, I just forgive you. It will be taking that bride of unfaithfulness and making her into the spotless bride. And that's a miracle to do that. But that's what God says, I'm going to do. I'll betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in loving kindness and compassion. And I will betroth you to me in faithfulness. Then you will know the Lord. And that we're going to see that idea of knowing the Lord. I think that's going to be one of the big ideas that take us all throughout Hosea. It's not mentioned a lot here, but we're going to see it a lot more later on. Sometimes it will be translated this way, sometimes it will be translated different. But that idea, you will know the Lord. Verse 21, it will come about in that day that I will respond, declares the Lord. Now notice a threefold reference to responding, that I will respond. Sometimes you can take that term and translate it answer, but it means the same idea. When you answer, you're responding to a question or a statement. I will respond, declares the Lord. I will respond to the heavens, and they will respond to the earth, and the earth will respond to the grain, to the new wine, and to the oil, and they will respond to Jezreel. That is, it's going to come from me, and it's going to affect the heavens and the earth, and the grain and the wine and the land, and it's all going to be wonderful. Verse 23, I will sow her. Now notice, this is the language, these terms that were used of judgment, but here they are used of blessing. I will sow her. Remember that Jezreel means sown of God or scattered by God. But here it's not being scattered, here it's being planted in the land. It's yes, that seed which is scattered, but now which begins to grow. I will sow her for myself in the land. I will also have compassion. Remember, no compassion, but now I'm going to have compassion on her who had not obtained compassion. And I will say to those who were not my people, you are my people. And so notice all three children, their names, which had before been used of judgment, are now going to be reminders of a promise of grace where they will say, you are my God. And so you become my people, and he becomes our God. So we've seen chapter 1 with the names of judgment, followed by promise. Chapter 2, the songs of judgment, followed by a promise of grace again. Chapter 3 is going to be a very short chapter, story of judgment, but this time it's given in story form. And finally, again, a promise of grace when we come to the last verse. Chapter 3, verse 1, then the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by her husband, yet an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the sons of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love raisin cakes. The idea of raisin cakes, they're not really sure how to translate that. I suppose this one will do. But it seems to be the idea they're loving things they shouldn't be loving. They're loving those things connected with adultery. And so notice that Hosea is now acting this out. Verse 2, so I bought her for myself. And this seems to be the idea that she's gone out from him, and now he is repurchasing her. He is redeeming her. He's paying a price. He's purchasing her for the price of sort of a secondhand servant, a secondhand slave. I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a half of barley. I got her at bargain basement deals, if I can translate it that way. Verse 3, then I said to her, you shall stay with me for many days. You shall not play the harlot, nor shall you have a man. So I will also be toward you. Now notice what he is saying to her. Yes, I purchased you for myself, but we're not going to enter into a sexual union. We're not going to play the part of being married. Instead, I'm keeping you chaste. I'm keeping you pure. You weren't pure, but I'm going to make you such, and I'm going to make you live that way. You won't have a man, not even me. So I will also be toward you. And now, by explanation, verse 4, for the sons of Israel will remain for many days without king or prince. Now, these are things that Israel used to have. They had kings, and they had princes, and they had sacrifices, and they had ephods, but they also had idols. Notice most of those were good things, but then that last one, the household idol, was something they weren't supposed to have. They had all these things, and God says, I'm going to take you, and I'm going to make you chaste. I'm going to do something to you so that you will not have a king or a prince or a sacrifice or nothing, but no idols either. And you're going to be without these things for many days. What happens at the end of that time? Afterward, the sons of Israel will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and they will come trembling to the Lord and to his goodness in the last days. You see, there's going to be many days where they have no king, when they have no prince, when they have no sacrifices, no ephods. And this is a good part, no idols. But then, in the last days, I'm going to do something that's going to answer those needs. What is he going to do? When's he going to do it? And the answer is that he did do it. When he sent the king, when he sent the prince, when he sent the one who became the ultimate sacrifice, when he sent the one who embodied the ephod and who does away with all idols, not just the physical idols, but also the idols of the heart. King Jesus, the great prince, the one who offered himself as the ultimate sacrifice, who embodies all of that. And once you come to know him, all idols lose their luster.